We talked also a year ago, roughly last year, and it was the same price. It was the same kind of sentiment. It was all the same
Yeah.
thing. And like nothing actually happened in like 1 year. And I think that's how most Bitcoiners kind of feel right now with the price action and all of the things that are going on. How do you feel currently in Bitcoin, and what are you kind of expecting?
I'm not paying attention to the Bitcoin price on a daily basis. I've done that in the past. I've been around in Bitcoin, as we talked about last time, since roughly 2017, end of 2017. And I've seen enough ups and downs to sort of more take the long view. And once one has conviction around Bitcoin, as like the ultimate savings technology or pristine collateral for other things, like we've talked about last time, it's much easier not to pay attention to the vicissitudes of every day's price action. It was interesting over the last 12 months, or actually I think it's a little fewer than 12 months since we last spoke. We hit an all-time high in that span and crashed back down. For those of us who've been around for a while, dropping from that particular all-time high down to over 100 for a long time. Was not at all a crash. It was more like just an adjustment. It doesn't feel great where we're recording now in the grand scheme of things. But before I came on, I was looking at the 1 year, the 5 year, and the all-time graphs for the Bitcoin price, and we're like, you should. I mean, that's anybody who's listening to this and hasn't looked at that for a while should look at all time, because we are still so hugely up over the long term, that it sort of puts your perspective back into place. And one other thing is, looking out what's going forward, which is the essence of your question, where are we going? I still think that the thesis behind Bitcoin is what we've always thought it is. I think the supply and demand, action is the wrong word, but the supply and demand forces that sort of move the price on a day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month basis are more profound for the future of Bitcoin than even a year ago or a year and a half ago. I think we're exactly where we need to be. I would love the price to be higher, just like everybody else would. But I don't think that anything has changed in the last year to make the long-term view any less vibrant than it was when we talked last time.
And I think this is the kind of, I call it the Bitcoin Zen, or like the Bitcoin OG kind of flair, whatever you want to call the vibe of that, is that you get if you hold Bitcoin for the long run. So I always tell people, wait for at least 2 cycles. Like if you get into Bitcoin now, wait 2 cycles, 8 years. This is the absolute minimum that you should be into Bitcoin before even judging your investment. Right. If you want to judge your investment by pure market force and not fundamental analysis, just like what the price of it is, which I think is a mistake, but like if you do that, wait 8 years. I myself am not even 8 years into Bitcoin. I'm now around 6 years into Bitcoin, so I'm coming up to that thing. And since I'm in Bitcoin, Bitcoin went up more than 10x. So it's like an absolute crazy. It's like 6 years, 10x. Like, where else do you get this kind of returns? It's almost like a startup, as we might touch on later also. And so getting to this Bitcoin Zen of just like, I save in Bitcoin for the long run, and I build my business, my life, my family, my health, my friends, all of those things. And I can focus on those things and just like let the money be money. Like, this is the thing where I think we really need to come at for Bitcoiners. And I think it's hard to understand, especially if you are just like 1-2 years into it.
I completely agree. I'm curious to know for on your side. Last time we talked, you mentioned that you're more or less on a Bitcoin standard yourself, and I wonder whether there's been any changes in how you think about it over the past year. Maybe not necessarily based on the price, but based on more and more people coming into Bitcoin. I think the price is really like I just said, it's very much impacted by supply and demand, but the supply, meaning people selling into obvious demand, supply has sort of kept pace with an increasing demand, is what I've observed over the past year. And I wonder whether A, you think that's true, and B, how it's impacted you and how you run your operation on a Bitcoin standard.
I think there is something, and I'm curious if you also agree with that. I think we should normalize the meme that is out there with hodl, hold on for dear life, don't do anything with it.
Yeah.
I start to hate that meme. And I get the essence of it, like you should have Bitcoin, not put anything in like weird stock, or like put anything like into altcoins or meme coins or anything like that. In that essence, I still believe in it. But in the end of the day, it's money, and you should normalize using money for life. If you wanna build a business, you need the money. If you wanna go on a vacation, you need the money. If you wanna build a home, you need the money. Like Bitcoin is not something that should accumulate till you die, and you die with the biggest possible stack. That should not be, in my opinion, the goal of Bitcoin. Yes, maybe you have the goal of building generational wealth and leaving it for the kids and all of that, but I feel like you should use a Bitcoin. I feel like that's why you have it, and enjoy your life. And that's not really answering your question, but that's something I saw that changed in my mind the last 1 year, or maybe 1.5 years, where I see people clinging onto their Bitcoin as it is something that if you sell 2% of it, everything breaks down. You know, like that kind of a feeling. I don't know if you can relate to that.
I can. I think we touched on it a little bit last time as well. I do think that. Well, I have a couple of thoughts. One is thinking long term about saving and building wealth in Bitcoin does shift how one thinks about what one needs on a day-to-day basis. You know, do I need a new car? And sometimes you do, right? Or do I need a better, bigger house or whatever? And sometimes where you are is no longer sufficient for whatever reason, whether your family is growing or it just doesn't feel as good as you want it to, and you can afford to move up, or you want to downsize. You know, I'm to again sort of semi-dox myself. I have a daughter in college, and so my wife and I have an empty nest now, and we actually sort of shifted as she was getting to the college age. But it's very, very common for people as their kids start to leave home that you don't need a relatively large place, and downsizing makes a ton of sense. And where would you put your capital? I mean, Bitcoin is the place to put it. But to your point, Bitcoin is a tool, and whether one is starting a business or just wants to not have to work as much, or wants to throw themselves into something that isn't generating income for a certain amount of time, having Bitcoin as a tool to be used, whether it's selling it from time to time or borrowing against it, or just shaving off a few sats on a monthly basis to close a gap. I think it's absolutely reasonable, and we should all be so lucky to be in a position like the OGs who also have a massive income from some fiat type job, who don't have to touch and get to continue to stack at a relatively high rate. That's not the situation that most people find themselves in. I aspire to that, but in the meantime, I'm doing what I can, and the whole point is to stack as many sats as you can. But that doesn't mean one doesn't do what one needs to do for yourself and your family.
I think so too. And another thing with the whole personal finance things, I think that changed, and maybe it's just that I no longer see only the responsibility for myself, but also for my girlfriend, and I try to be more responsible with money. That I actually think is reasonable to have a US dollar or euro or whatever your local fiat currency is, a fiat reserve that can cover maybe a month, 3 months, 6 months, 8 months of living expenses for whatever responsibility you have. I mean, if you are single, 18 years old, like who cares? Go all in, like have fun. Like you are 18 years old, you have no responsibilities. If you're 45, 3 kids and a small business, it's just like very different. And there's like all the things in between. How do you look at like having the personal finance things of Bitcoin, not being all in and being very aggressive on Bitcoin because you know what Bitcoin is, but still being reasonable in a sense where there's a 42-year-old with like one or two kids listening, like how the heck should you think about the personal finance things of things?
Absolutely. I mean, the work that I do with the Bitcoin Advisor, helping people secure their Bitcoin long term with multi-sig collaborative custody, very much takes all of the stuff you just talked about in mind. In fact, the way I think about it is you've got long term savings. This is very similar to what my parents taught me way before Bitcoin even existed. But you have long term savings that you don't touch. You have that in a vault with multiple keys that, and ideally with somebody like the Bitcoin Advisor, so that that is secured long term, and there's nothing that will compromise your ability to have that. And then in what you mentioned a second ago, what resonated for me is the idea of having a reserve, whether it's 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever works for you and your lifestyle. I still think that if we're talking about like a 6-month reserve, I'll use the number you talked about. If you have a 3-month reserve where you could just pay all of your expenses for at least 3 months with no new income coming in, I still think it makes sense to have the bulk of that in Bitcoin, but just available so that you can, whether it's on a strike or fold card where you could just put it down and use it as currency, or it's just you're holding it in some way where you could get access to it fairly quickly. I still think that makes sense for something that's as large as a multi-month reserve, right? And then day to day, to your point, whether it's 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, everybody's different, but having that be in fiat and just as on a debit card or whatever, so you're not thinking about the price of Bitcoin when you're buying a cup of coffee or taking somebody to lunch. That makes a total sense to me. That's the version that I think about anyway.
Interesting. No, I'm actually thinking of having. I'm not there yet. I come from a place where I was ridiculously long on Bitcoin, with like 110, 120%, and like having no cash at all. I'm thinking
I have many
now,
friends like that. Yeah.
yeah, and it's not healthy. Like I don't feel good with that. I have to be completely honest. Liquidity was always low with me, and it never was a problem because I always had income to compensate for it. But it's always like a struggle of like, oh yeah, like I need this income. I need to build this client. I need to have this invoice out there. Like it's like I'm actually never talked about that on the podcast. Like I was always super low on liquidity, to be as aggressive as possible, and seeing a net worth and you're like, I could pay for everything for quite some time, and maybe never have to work again, like kind of a thing. But at the same time, it's like my liquidity is so low, where I'm like, why don't I build a euro, for me it's euro reserve, where I can easily pay 3 to maybe 4 months of things just to have it there. And then this is like my point. And if I have less than that, I put it in my fiat reserve. If I have more than that, I just put it in the Bitcoin reserve, of having the not stress out around the price. And also it allows you can then have strategies around like, hey, the Bitcoin price is like 40% lower than all-time high. Maybe I go from 3 months to 2 months, and then hey, the Bitcoin price is like an all-time high. It's like ripped like 2x the last 1 year.
Maybe I shave a little off.
Yeah, like not even cheating, like off, just like the new money coming in, like going into the fiat dollar reserve rather than Bitcoin. I think James Jack usually talks about this weighted DCA and all of that. I don't do that yet, but I'm thinking more and more. And also we had recently, sorry for like rambling on for so long, but we had recently a guest, Stephen Pernod, on the podcast, and he actually talked about that the perfect allocation to Bitcoin is not 100%, but around 75%, because you need that cash reserve. And he talks about cash reserve can be stretch, which is super interesting, or just like actual cash. And using that, if like Bitcoin goes down, you can lower that and like put more into Bitcoin and like try to kind of use it as a buffer. rather than having 100% Bitcoin, and that you actually end up with a better portfolio and a better long-term performance if you don't have everything in Bitcoin, because the liquidity gives you something to play with.
Yeah,
I'm not 100% sure of that, because like people when they play, they usually lose. But you get my point of like having like actual cold hard cash.
100%. The one that's near and dear to my heart, my wife and I laugh about it pretty often, actually. If you play it too close, to your point, if you have if you don't have enough in whatever bank account you're using to pay for whatever's coming in, right? Think about recurring charges, whether it's insurance or, well, there's any number of them, right? Like we all have recurring charges, and the dumb example probably is your internet bill and your streaming service and stuff that just hits, and a few of them don't hit always on the same day. And so sometimes, I'm sure you've experienced this, there's just not enough in that bank account when a thing comes in, and you get a little notice from the bank saying, move some money over here, please. And we have checks and balances, so we're not ever actually defaulting on anything, but there's a little bit of stress there, right? So what we'll do, we're imperfect at this, but we've gotten better at making sure that there's enough of a reserve so that there's literally no recurring bill that can come in as a surprise. And to your point, one manages that as best one can. And there has definitely been time when we've been plowing into Bitcoin and not leaving enough to make sure that a bill is going to get paid. Anyway, it's not that big a deal. These are like relatively these are good problems to have, for sure. But I definitely, like you, it sounds like, I much prefer to not ever have to worry about some random bill. The hard ones are there's a bill that I'm thinking of right now that comes in every quarter, and it's a little weird, like what day of that third month it comes in, and it's a relatively large one because it's a quarterly bill as opposed to a monthly one, and depending on what cycle we're in, or where the Bitcoin price is. In the past, we've definitely had to scramble and transfer money, just to make sure that there's no problem. Anyway, I don't like that any more than you or anybody else does. And so yes, having enough of a cushion so that never happens, and then rebalancing, as you talked about, on a semi-regular basis, and keeping in mind what the price is a really wise thing to do, and makes for a little more harmony, a financial harmony, shall we say.
I'm actually curious because I see it now with myself a little bit only in the starting, but like I'm super young and I just get started now with 27. How has in your life, as you mentioned, you have a daughter, a wife, I think wife, I actually don't know,
yes,
but like
yes.
a wife, and so like how has your personal finance mindset changed from being a single man to being married to being a father, of being like now you also run a startup? Like how have those different life seasons changed your view and mindset around personal finance?
Well, the single biggest change was having our daughter. So I said she's in college, so it's almost 21 years now. That was the single biggest inflection point for me personally. I can't speak for my wife, and we all grow up in different ways, right? The financial circumstances of her and her family, it was somewhat different from mine. Professional class parents, but varying degrees of financial success. When my wife and I got married, it was the very beginning of the 2000s, and so the great financial crisis hadn't happened. So we've had some ups and downs financially, just like so many people around the world have had. But to your point about how I've thought about it, and just being specific around the family component, becoming a father was a huge change. So prior, I can't remember if we talked about this last time, but I know I've said it before. Prior to our daughter being born, even getting married, it didn't really change my time horizon, the way I was thinking about whether it was professionally or financially. I was thinking more than 2 or 3 months out, but it was difficult to sort of see where I would be more than 6 or even 12 months out. If you're in a like a long-term steady job, it's much easier and it's pretty linear, right? But I've always been sort of, entrepreneurial, even when I was just an employee in the entertainment business. That's sort of it has sort of a gig and entrepreneurial sort of mindset that sort of gets baked into you.
The first thing that every Bitcoiner does, and the most important activity that every Bitcoiner keeps on doing, is buying Bitcoin. And I personally use Relay to buy and sometimes also spend or sell my Bitcoin. And there are two main reasons why I do so. The first one is it's Bitcoin only. They do not do any shit coins. They do not do any cryptos, any stocks, or anything else. This is a tool, an app that is fully focused only and solely on Bitcoin. The second one is self-custody. They give you the keys to your Bitcoin the moment you buy them. You never give them the control over your Bitcoin, and you don't have to trust them because you can verify that you and only you have the keys to your Bitcoin. There's no third-party risk. There's no freezing of your assets. There's no rug pulling. There's nothing of that. Download Relay, the app, on your phone, or go to relay.app on your browser and use code Robin to save fees and get cheaper Bitcoin. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called micro seed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With micro seed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because MicroSeed is not selling the washer. MicroSeed is selling the device that stamps the washer. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today, and you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io.